church discipline. Okay. Here we go. The new, where we're going now is this idea of where do we find the meaning? Because as we looked at finding the larger context of verses, of particular verses, now we want to look at where does the meaning of the text itself come from? Where do we find it? Okay, and there are three possible options, should I say. The author, and that means his intent, the literary, historical, and cultural background of the text. Then B, or number two, is the text. Who wrote it is the first problem. Did it have to have a life of its own? In other words, who wrote the text, and did the text have a life of its own? Well, we're going to ferret this out in a minute, okay? And then the third one is the reader response. The reader response. And that simply says, what does the passage mean to me? But that's the first article we read. What does it mean to me? Right? Here, multiple meanings are possible in any text. Individuals' frame of reference becomes the meaning. And the meaning was a historical meaning apart from history. We don't pay attention to it. So of the three possible options, these are the three places where meaning is determined or said to be determined from. The Bible itself, which is the text, and whether or not it has a life of its own. In other words, does it adjust as time moves on, right? Does thou shalt not steal, when God had the Ten Commandments given to Moses, as time moves on, does thou shalt not steal change? In other words, or better put, is there an exception to it, right? When does it become an exception? Thou shalt not steal unless you're hungry, right? That whole idea of the Word of God, of the text having a life of its own, we can also see in the way we interpret the Constitution and the way they do it in the Constitution these days. So these are three different approaches to how people determine the meaning of a text, right? And one of the three of these is the right one. The other two are wrong. Okay, that's the idea here. I will send you the article via email this week. It says it's called the Analogy of Faith, and that'll be something we'll be looking at later on to help us better ferret out what's going on here. But anyway, let's look at these three things. Quote, where meaning resides. Where do we get meaning from? How do we determine what the Bible really means? Or what is the Bible really, what it really means? Okay, if we look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, and Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 through 3, Paul changes the word land to catch to earth because it suited the audience at his time. Example given, Jews had land, Gentiles did not, but were on the earth. And so again, when we read, honor thy mother and thy father in the day that the Lord thy God giveth you, that you may live long in the land, right? That's the Old Testament. But in that same, in Ephesians, he says, honor thy mother and thy father, that thy days may be longer upon the face of the earth, right? Now, did the meaning change? Did the meaning change from the Old Testament to the New Testament as it related to that commandment? Y'all going there in your Bibles?
Yeah.
Bless y'all life. That's what we're supposed to do. Go check it out yourself. Read, people. Okay. Yes. But again, the challenge is when we look at that, does that necessarily mean that since the word changed, the meaning changed? No. That's my response to you. No, it does not mean that. In fact, all the author is doing, all Paul is doing when he uses the word earth as opposed to land, is he is writing in the New Testament sense. Gentiles were grafted into the church at this point in time, and a lot of them didn't have land, right? They didn't have a promised land, right? Mm-hmm. And so the whole idea of honoring your mother and father is so that your days may be longer in the land or in the earth, i.e. your life might run its full course. That's the teaching. Reader response is the dominant vehicle of biblical interpretation today. There are no checks and balances in this type of system. Did I miss a slide? It feels like I missed a slide.
What, this one?
We're on your page.
Yo, are we together?
Yes.
Okay, we're good. As long as we're together.
Yeah, you're
It just feels like there's some information missing between there because I'm doing reader response already, and I'm supposed to do author's intent first.
Right, that's where it's written, because this, the intent, because we're down
on
here.
this paper, it's right.
Yeah, let's see. Here we go. No, I'm good. We're good. Okay, we're good. Okay, so everybody with me?
Yes.
So we're on this one here. This is the one here. Yeah. So we have a couple of blanks to fill in there. Next, the author's intent is the hermeneutic. Ooh, yeah, this is wrong. This should be the last slide, but that's all right. Let's keep going. The author's intent is the hermeneutical goal. It is the way to orthodox interpretation. Okay, the author's intent. Now that we know that, we're going to look at the progression of this thing. Let me know when you're ready.
So the way to orthodox.
Orthodox interpretation.
How do you orthodox?
Orthodox is right thinking, or right way. That's what that word
It's
means.
the way to.
Yeah. They have the orthodox view, and then they have the heretical view, right? Or the right view, or the heretical view. The accurate view, or the heretical meaning in error, right? That's kind of the whole idea here. So as what we're talking about, and as we teach through this particular course, the whole point is to come out with orthodox thinking, right thinking, right? Not a right interpretation, not error or heretical in that sense.
So are you saying hermeneutical is heretical?
No, hermeneutics,
It's the right way.
the hermeneutical goal. Hermeneutics is simply, again, as we begin at the beginning, is the interpretation, the art and science of biblical interpretation. That's really what hermeneutics is. Hermeneutical means the resulting, the result of that. And so the goal, the hermeneutical goal, okay, is the way to orthodox interpretation. In other words, the goal of it is to get us to the right interpretation, the right meaning of the text. Here we go. Let's have some fun. Here we go. Battle for meaning in interpretive history. Here we go. This is how it happened. Readers, interpreters, the text itself, and the author. Notice here, you have your far left, you have the reader interpreting what? The text. Then here you have the author, writing the text. That's what happens. So the author wrote it, okay, now the reader has to interpret it. That's the whole idea here, the process. Authors for thousands of years, the classical emphasis for discovering meaning was upon the authors and their intentions within their historical setting. So when Paul wrote, when Moses had his scribe write, when they had those things done, when they had them written down, they had an intent for it was an intention behind them having them recorded. That's really what this is saying. And that intent in the historical setting to which it was written is where the meaning actually hangs out. That's where we get the meaning from.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Why is not the author on the left and the reader on the right?
This is because that's the way Patrick did.
Oh, okay. Because you're reading from left.
Right to left, left to right.
Yes.
Right. Well, watch this.
I said there must be a philosophical reason for that.
No.
Okay.
If it is, I can't figure it out. Right. And again, this is where I got it off of my syllabus in the class that I took at when we were doing it. So I didn't want to change it up because I figured whatever was going on, that's what they meant, right?
Okay.
But again,
Well, actually, that is, what we're learning here in this class is that example.
This here.
This is where we are. Now let's look back and see how we got there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Ready for some more?
Yes.
Okay, so next what happened was, early in the 20th century, the author was banished and the focus moved to a closed reading of the text, which supposedly has a life of its own as an artifact. And basically what he's saying here is basically all of a sudden, the word of God began to change. The text, the author was no longer the way you interpret or come to what the text meant. It was all about the text itself, right? And it moved us further away from the original meaning of the text to a kind of mushy-gushy one. If you think back and when we were doing the history of hermeneutics and we got into the modern period, and then we got into the post-World War I period, where all of a sudden these existential thinking started coming, all these other things started to filter in. This is where it started to happen. Now, modern interpretation today, since the 1960s, the emphasis has shifted even more radically to the astonishing belief that readers not only create the meaning, but they also create the text itself. That's dangerous stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, that's dangerous stuff. So how does that look in our world today, especially as we pick up the Word of God and begin to interpret it?
But that's where you have, for one thing, people, instead of like originally, they were doing it for clarity, a new version, let's say. But by the time you get to today, you have really a new Bible with some of these versions because they believe that they create the meaning themselves. They don't try, they don't even have a thought about what was intended originally.
Exactly. It's what's relevant to what it feels like to what I think.
Yeah. It's important. It's your frame of reference. And you don't go back and historically look at the other previous frames of reference.
Right.
You're now interpreting strictly on your own frame of reference.
And that's the danger in
Yes.
it all. You remember when we did again, and go back to the whole existential postmodern mindset, that kind of thing. We read those comments by some of the postmodern thinkers. This idea of moving the Bible into a postmodern society so that they can understand it was never God's intent. Because here's what we have to understand: whether or not people accept the truth or not doesn't change it. And watch this. And whether or not we believe the truth or not doesn't change it. So methodology is important. Okay, sure enough, as you attempt to make the methods of your communicating effective, but the text itself should not be affected by that. So again, we got into this big old place now where we determine what the meaning of the Word of God means. That's why when we read that article, and the author entitled it "What It Means to Me," and he said that when we start Bible studies, he said we'll open up by saying, okay, well, what does this text mean to you? What does this particular passage mean to you? No, bad idea. Okay, because it means something different to everybody. Continuing with the